Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I was just finishing up dinner when my phone buzzed with an emergency alert. At first, I thought it was another weather warning, but when I glanced at the screen, my stomach dropped. Emergency alert, seek shelter immediately. Civil authorities report an unknown contagion spreading rapidly. Avoid crowds. Further instructions to follow. I blinked at the words, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. What kind of emergency alert was this? I had never seen one like it before. My gut told me it wasn't just a glitch. The distant wail of sirens outside made my decision for me. I stood up and walked to the window. My apartment overlooked a busy intersection, but the usual hum of city life was gone. Instead, I saw people running. Some were screaming. A few cars had crashed into light poles, their drivers nowhere in sight. Then I saw the first one. A man in torn clothes stumbled into the street, moving strangely, like he was struggling to stay upright. A woman ran past him, but he reached out and grabbed her arm. She yanked away, but he held tight. And then I stepped back from the window, my breath catching in my throat. No way. I had just watched something that should have been impossible. My phone buzzed again, another alert. Stay indoors. Lock all doors and windows. Do not engage with infected individuals. Infected. That word sent a cold chill down my spine. I turned and locked my door. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, which gave me some relief, but I knew I had to be careful. I grabbed my keys, my pocket knife, and a flashlight. Then I shut off the lights and pulled the blinds. If people were panicking out there, I didn't want to attract any attention. More sirens screamed in the distance. A loud crash echoed from somewhere below. My neighbors were shouting, something about barricading the lobby. I crept back to the window and peeked out. More of those people were in the streets now. Some ran, some stumbled. One crashed headfirst into a car door but kept going, as if it hadn't even felt the impact. A news notification popped up on my phone. Breaking. Unexplained attacks spreading across multiple cities. Authorities urge immediate shelter in place. Suspected outbreak. The rest of the headline was cut off, but I didn't need to read more. I knew exactly what this was. This was no ordinary emergency. This was the beginning of something much worse. I stayed by the window, my pulse hammering in my ears. More people ran past below, their screams mixing with the wailing sirens. The streetlights cast long shadows, twisting the chaos into something even more surreal. A man sprinted across the intersection, only to be tackled from behind by one of those things. He hit the pavement hard. I expected him to fight back, to push the person off, but he didn't. The thing on top of him jerked violently, its movements frantic, desperate. I turned away. I didn't need to see the rest. My hands shook as I reached for my phone again. No new alerts, no updates. Just that last message, still glowing on my screen. Stay indoors, lock all doors and windows. Do not engage with infected individuals. My brain struggled to process it. This was real. This wasn't some prank or mistake. Something bad was happening out there. A loud bang at my door made me jump. I spun around, my heart pounding. Someone was outside, pounding their fist against the wood. "Let me in!" a voice shouted. "Please, I—" The words were cut off by a scream, followed by heavy footsteps sprinting away down the hall. Then, silence. I stood frozen, my breath shallow. I wanted to help, but I couldn't risk it, not without knowing what was going on. Instead, I backed away from the door and grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a metal flashlight. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Another siren blared outside, followed by the crack of what sounded like fireworks. No, gunfire. My stomach clenched. I needed more information. I turned on the TV, flipping through the channels until I found a live news broadcast. A pale, wide-eyed anchor stared at the camera, his voice unsteady. Multiple reports of violent attacks in major cities. Authorities are urging all citizens to remain indoors. The National Guard has been deployed to contain what officials are calling an unidentified outbreak. A shaky video clip filled the screen. Someone filmed from an apartment window as a group of people sprinted down a sidewalk. Then, from the shadows, they emerged. They didn't run. They lunged. They tackled people to the ground with impossible speed. And once they had them, the footage cut off. The anchor looked sick. I grabbed the remote and turned the volume down, just as another loud thud came from outside my door. Not a knock, something heavier, like a body slamming against it. I took a slow step back, gripping the flashlight tighter. Then came the sound that made my blood run cold. A low, guttural groan. Something was on the other side of that door, and it wasn't human. The groan outside my door sent a chill through me. It was low, drawn out, wrong, like something struggling to remember how to breathe. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, my pulse hammering in my ears. Think. My apartment was secure. Door locked, windows shut. I just had to stay quiet. Another thud. I took a step back, then another. The thing outside pressed against the door, dragging its weight across it. I could hear slow, uneven breathing, raspy, wet. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. Silence. I waited. My breath held. 5 seconds. 10. Still nothing. Then bang! The doorframe rattled as something heavy slammed against it, again and again. I backed away fast, my brain screaming at me to move. That lock wouldn't hold forever. Another bang. The wood cracked. I turned and ran to the kitchen, grabbing the biggest knife I had. My hands were slick with sweat, my heart racing. The door shuddered again, then footsteps, fading. It was leaving. I waited, straining to hear anything. Nothing, just the distant chaos outside. I exhaled slowly, my muscles still locked up. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the knife. I forced myself to put it down and took a deep breath. Think. I needed to get out of here. The apartment was safe for now, but I had no idea how bad things were going to get. My fridge was nearly empty. My only real supplies were a couple of water bottles and a bag of stale chips. That wasn't going to last long. A new alert flashed across my phone screen. Military checkpoints established at key locations. Shelter is being provided at designated zones. Avoid infected individuals at all costs. A second message followed. If you are in a secure location, do not attempt to evacuate unless absolutely necessary. I looked back at the door. The wood had splintered. A little more force, and that thing would have been inside. It's necessary. I grabbed my backpack and started throwing whatever I could. Water, snacks, first aid kit, my pocket knife, flashlight, anything that might help. I needed a plan. I opened my laptop and checked the city map. One of the checkpoints was only a few miles away, set up at a stadium. If I moved quickly, I could get there before things got worse. Another groan echoed from the hallway, then another. They were still out there. I peeked through the peephole. The hallway was dim, the flickering light casting eerie shadows. But I saw movement. Slow, shuffling figures. 3 of them. I swallowed hard. If I was getting out of here, I had to do it soon. I couldn't stay here, that much was clear. The door was already cracked and those things were still in the hallway. If they realized I was inside, I'd be trapped. I slung my backpack over my shoulder and crept toward the window. I was on the 3rd floor, too high to jump, but maybe there was another way down. I peeked through the blinds. The street was worse than before. More of them were out there, wandering aimlessly or chasing after anything that moved. Some people were still alive, running, hiding. A few cars were speeding recklessly down the road, swerving to avoid wreckage. A fire had broken out across the block, smoke rising into the night sky. The whole city was unraveling. I scanned the building across from me. Fire escapes. That gave me an idea. I backed away from the window and moved to the apartment door. If I couldn't go down, I needed to go up. The roof might have another way out, maybe a ladder leading down the other side. But first, I had to get past the things in the hallway. I pressed my ear against the door. Silence. I carefully unlatched the lock, knife in one hand, flashlight in the other. Slowly, I pulled the door open an inch and peered out. The hallway was dark, the overhead lights flickering weakly. The 3 figures I had seen earlier were gone. I took a slow, steady breath and stepped outside. Every instinct screamed at me to move fast, but I forced myself to stay quiet. I crept toward the stairwell, stepping over a backpack someone had dropped. Halfway there, I heard it. A wet shuffle. I turned my head just enough to see it. A man stood near a broken apartment door, his back to me. His clothes were torn, his arm bent at an unnatural angle. He swayed slightly, as if listening for something. Then, he turned his head. His eyes were cloudy, unfocused, his mouth hung open, a slow, rattling breath escaping. I froze. For a second, I thought maybe he doesn't see me, maybe I could just... The floor creaked under my foot. His head snapped toward me. For a single heartbeat, we stared at each other. Then he lunged. I ran. I sprinted down the hall, shoving past debris. The stairwell door was ahead, just a few more feet. I slammed into it, shoved it open, and stumbled inside. Footsteps pounded behind me. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my legs burning. I could hear him crashing against the walls, clawing after me. One more flight. I burst through the door to the roof, my breath ragged. The night air hit me like a wave. I turned just in time to see the thing burst through after me. It charged. I raised the flashlight and swung as hard as I could. Crack. The impact sent him stumbling, his legs tangling. He tripped, then went over the edge. I didn't watch him fall. I was already running. I'd made it to the roof, but I still wasn't safe. I needed to find a way down fast. I sprinted across the rooftop, my lungs burning. The city stretched out before me, a war zone. Fires raged in the distance, their glow reflecting off the glass buildings. Sirens wailed. Gunshots echoed. Screams cut through the night. And below, the streets were overrun. From up here, I could see them, hundreds of them. Wandering, limping, some moving in sudden bursts, attacking anything that made noise. Some were fresh, barely different from the people they had once been. Others weren't. I swallowed hard. I can't go down there. I reached the edge of the building and looked over. 3 floors down was still too far to jump. My best bet was finding another rooftop close enough to cross. I turned and froze. The stairwell door slammed open behind me. More of them. I didn't know how they had followed me up, but they had. 2, 3, then 5. They poured onto the roof, their heads snapping toward me, their movements jerky but fast. I ran. I darted toward the next rooftop, only a 6-foot gap. If I jumped hard, I could make it. The first one lunged. I twisted away, barely dodging its grasp. My foot slipped on loose gravel, and I nearly lost my balance. No time! I sprinted full speed, planted my foot at the edge and jumped. For a split second, I was airborne. Then impact. I hit the rooftop hard, rolled, and scrambled to my feet. My hands were scraped raw, but I didn't care. Behind me, the first one reached the edge and fell short. It plummeted between the buildings with a sickening crunch. The others weren't as reckless. They stood at the edge, staring at me with those lifeless eyes, swaying like they were trying to decide if I was worth chasing. Then, one by one, they turned back. I exhaled sharply, shaking with adrenaline. I made it, but I wasn't safe yet. I hurried across the rooftop, searching for another way down. A fire escape, a ladder, anything? Then I spotted it, an old metal staircase leading down the side of the building. Rusted, but intact. I climbed over the ledge and onto the first step. It groaned under my weight. I held my breath. Please don't break. Step by step, I descended. The streets below were crawling with them, but if I moved carefully, a metallic screech shattered the air. I barely had time to react before the bolts snapped. The entire staircase lurched. Then, it collapsed. I fell. The world tilted. I hit the fire escape hard, my shoulder slamming into rusted metal as the entire structure gave way. I didn't have time to think, I just fell. The lower section of the staircase collapsed under me, twisting as it tore free from the bolts. I flailed, grabbing for anything. Crash. I landed in a pile of garbage bags, the air knocked from my lungs. The impact rattled every bone in my body, but I was alive. I sucked in a ragged breath and forced myself up. Pain flared in my ribs, but nothing felt broken. I had landed in an alley, hidden between buildings. For a second, I thought maybe they didn't hear me. Then came the groans. Slow, low, getting closer. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain. My backpack was still on me, my flashlight still tucked in my belt. No time to check for injuries. No time for anything. I peeked around the corner. The street was swarming. Dozens of them wandering aimlessly, some standing still, swaying. Others pacing, snapping their heads toward every sound. And then there were the fast ones. I saw one sprint across the road, tackling a screaming man into the pavement. He barely had time to react before the others piled on him. I swallowed hard and turned away. Don't look, keep moving. I stuck to the alley, creeping through the shadows. Every step was careful, measured. I didn't know if they could hear me breathing, but it felt like they could. I reached a side street. It was littered with overturned cars, broken glass, and bodies. Most of them weren't moving, but some were. I ducked behind a truck, my mind racing. Where now? The stadium checkpoint, that was still my best bet. I checked my phone 3 miles away. I could make it if I stayed quiet. Then a gunshot. Loud, too close. I flinched as the entire street erupted. The things around me snapped to attention. Their heads jerked toward the sound, their bodies tensing. Then, all at once, they ran. They rushed toward the noise, a tidal wave of hunger. I barely had time to react before the ones in the alley turned and saw me. My heart stopped. Then I ran. I sprinted. The moment their heads snapped toward me, I knew I was dead if I didn't move. Their groans turned into shrieks as they charged, feet pounding against pavement, closing the distance fast. I dodged around an overturned dumpster, cutting through the alley, my lungs burning. I didn't dare look back. If I slowed down, even for a second, I was done. I burst onto another street and nearly ran straight into a wrecked taxi. I twisted at the last second, barely avoiding slamming into it. My shoulder clipped the side, sending me stumbling, but I kept moving. Behind me, the swarm was relentless. More of them were joining in, some emerging from buildings, others drawn by the noise. They moved in erratic, jerky bursts, like puppets with tangled strings. I veered toward a gas station, searching desperately for a way out. I couldn't keep running forever. I needed to hide. The convenience store was dark, its glass windows smashed. A few bodies lay inside, unmoving. I didn't have time to check if they'd stay that way. I vaulted through the broken window, ignoring the glass slicing my arm. Pain didn't matter. Survival did. The moment I was inside, I dropped low and crawled behind a row of empty shelves. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pressed my back against the metal. Don't move. Don't breathe. The swarm outside thundered past. I clenched my fists, forcing myself not to flinch as dozens of them rushed by, their guttural moans filling the air. If even one of them turned and looked inside, it was over. The noise faded. Slowly, carefully, I peeked through a gap in the shelf. The street outside was still swarming, but they weren't looking for me anymore. They were chasing something else. Maybe the gunfire from earlier. I got lucky. I turned my attention back to the store. If I was going to make it to the stadium, I needed supplies. Anything useful. I moved through the aisles, keeping low. Most of the shelves were ransacked, but I managed to find a half-empty water bottle, some protein bars, and a roll of bandages. I was stuffing them into my bag when I heard it. A breath, not mine. I froze. It was coming from the back of the store. I gripped my flashlight and crept forward, heart hammering. The storage room door was cracked open, a faint shuffling sound coming from inside. I pushed the door open slowly. A man sat slumped against the wall, his clothes soaked in dark stains. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. He was alive. His eyes flickered up at me. He tried to speak, but his voice was dry, cracked. Then, his gaze drifted past me. My stomach turned to ice. I knew what that meant. I turned. Through the broken window, two figures had stopped, staring. Then they started walking toward me. The two figures outside stared. Their heads twitched, their bodies jerked unnaturally, like they had just realized I was there. Then they moved. They broke into a sprint, feet pounding against pavement as they charged toward the broken window. I barely had time to react. I grabbed a nearby metal shelf and shoved it over, blocking the entrance just as they lunged. They slammed into it, clawing, snarling, trying to push through. It wouldn't hold for long. I turned back to the injured man. His breaths were shallow, his skin pale. He tried to speak again, but his voice failed. I crouched next to him. "Can you walk?" He shook his head weakly. I cursed under my breath. I could drag him, but it would slow me down. And with the store about to be overrun, I had seconds to make a decision. The shelves behind me rattled. I didn't get a choice. The creatures outside shoved harder. The metal shelf scraped against the floor, giving way inch by inch. More of them were gathering now, dozens, all drawn to the noise. I grabbed the man's arm. "Come on!" He barely reacted. He wasn't going to make it. I hesitated, then crash. The front barrier collapsed, and the horde poured in. I ran. I sprinted through the back storage room, shoving through boxes. A side door, there had to be one. There. I crashed through it and stumbled into an alley. A rusted fence blocked the way forward, but I climbed. My fingers slipped, my muscles ached, but I pulled myself over and dropped to the other side. I landed hard, knees buckling, but I didn't stop. I kept running. The stadium was still miles away, but I could see its floodlights in the distance. It was my only chance. The city behind me was falling. Smoke curled into the sky. Sirens howled. The streets were nothing but chaos. I didn't know if I would make it. I didn't know if anyone would. but I kept moving, because stopping meant the end. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.